I would like to introduce you now to today's presenters, Matt Donovan and Kara Halter. As the Vice President of Digital Learning Strategies and Solutions, Matt Donovan brings more than 25 years of experience crafting training and development solutions with a focus on performance-driven learning. He's led the production of more than 300 custom online courses for Fortune 500 companies, many of which employ a scenario-based approach focusing on reinforcing authentic work practice. Matt has received his MS in Instructional Systems Technology from Indiana University and has been published in several learning industry publications. Kara is an instructional designer at GP Strategies with nearly 20 years of experience creating innovative learning solutions as a design and development leader, business analyst, and project manager. Her current passion is finding creative ways to address the needs of the modern learner. She also has a master's degree in instructional technology from the University of Georgia, and she actually currently is working from her office in Singapore, supporting some of our efforts and our clients in the Asia Pacific region. So welcome to both of you. Thank you for your time, Kara. I know it is very late there, so we appreciate you being with us today. And without further ado, Matt, I'm going to go ahead and turn the presentation over to you.
All right, thanks, Kayla. Appreciate that. So we're excited to be with you guys today, talk a little bit about MOOCs. And so cover what is a MOOC today, and then we're going to get into when to use a MOOC, and then talk about how we use MOOCs to actually inspire change or support long-term change initiatives, really getting to that change in behavior. And then the last one is we'll do a case study on a MOOC in action and how it actually comes to life with that. So before we get started, I think one of the things we do use the word MOOC here, and I think one of the things of point of contention is what exactly is a MOOC? And it comes over to some folks say, a MOOC was what it was back in 1989 when the concept first came out to things that are more, specific like SPOCs or other components with, that come out with smaller private online components. So what we want to do is grab a real quick version from you guys and say, what is your experience with MOOCs? And then we'll go into a little further the definition of what they are. But I'd like to see where you guys rest on it. We've got a poll here, so you see in the chat window over there, you'll be able to enter in your experience with MOOCs. I've never heard of them. I know what they are, but I don't have an experience. C, I've participated in at least one MOOC as a learner. And D, I've designed and built at least one MOOC. So, Kara, how are we doing?
Yes, we've got about 20 seconds left. So for the folks, it looks like everyone has filled them in. I'll give it about 15 more seconds for folks to put in their answers, and then we should have the results here shortly. All right. So let me go ahead and post those results for everyone to see. It's kind of a mixed review here, so it's a little bit different than what I expected.
There we go. I know what they are, but I don't have any experience. This seems to be our single largest category, but it's also spread between I've participated in at least one MOOC as a learner, and I've designed at least built one MOOC. So it's about roughly a third and a third for the most part. So, and then the small population has never heard of them at all. So it'll be good. We're kind of across the board with this. And I think one of the challenges for those of you that have participated in at least one MOOC, I think this has been one of the most challenging things when we come into talking about this is that depending on what type of MOOC you participated in or when you actually did one, you may have a more positive or less positive idea of what a MOOC really is. So for us, what we wanted to do is really think about what is our definition as we're going to move forward with this. So then you can, based on your experience, either how you've designed them or how you've participated in them or what you think they are, aligning around our definition. So a quick review is essentially, like I've mentioned, MOOCs have been around since I believe like 1989. They've been around for quite a while. Results have been mixed in the corporate applications. in the sense that higher ed is where most of them have really been adopted and used. But what we're finding now is that many of what we're calling as this massive open online course have really evolved into things that are no longer really massive or open. They're really time-bound, set over space, but they're really changing the definition of that true massive or open. There are still offerings out there that meet that criteria, but what we're talking about is really a new focus on things that are structured, time-bound, and actually have a social and a micro component to it, and we'll dig into that a little bit more. What I do want to dig into a little bit more are some of the myths that we've had about MOOCs, and this feeds into the differing experiences people have had with these over time. So these are just some of the myths. We probably have about a good 15 of these that we've kind of built as we've started to redefine and redevelop MOOCs of the future, which I call affectionately near synchronous learning experiences. But first one is they're just another form of self-paced online learning, which they're not. There is a fundamental shift in the way in which we think about how we design for them, how learners consume and participate in them. It is very different than standard WBTs. The assumption that they will replace WBTs, ILTs, and VILTs, and we won't be building any of those anymore. Actually, what we're seeing is that those elements are being integrated into that longer experience of what we're designing for. There is a single standard approach to designing all MOOCs. That is not true. Basically, looking at a fit-for-purpose approach to it, a MOOC can be designed to meet a range of outcomes for a range of learner experiences based on what they need to get out of it. But there are only a handful of things that, are absolutely probably non-starters, and we'll talk a little bit about some of that later, but there is no single standard approach to it. The same old blended learning in a new package. Again, what we're really talking about is bringing in that social into a platform that allows a back and forth on this. And then dropout rates are a fundamental problem. That's historically been a challenge, but what we've looked to is engineer and through our designs, ensure that you have high compliance and pull-through rates. And I think that that's something we're seeing a lot more success with, and the data is really bearing out that we're actually getting lots of completion scores, but it gets back to the design and the intent of the MOOC. Is it open, convergent, or is it really divergent? And the last one is really around can't deliver performance improvement through a MOOC. A MOOC is just general information. People kind of come in and talk about them. You can't really wrap application around it, which are all false. And you'll see in the example we've had where we do pull into that application. So really, what we're talking about for MOOCs, and this really kind of comes back to define it, which is they are cohort-driven. They are personalized, moderated experience that includes a human interaction component to it. It is not a group of people that are having individual self-paced experiences that are not connected to other folks. There's a cohort, there's a social component to it. It is spaced, which means that it is pulsed out over time. So instead of like just one afternoon and a group getting together, we're looking at expanding it out over an extended amount of time, 6, 8, 10, 12 weeks, where the learning is through much more of a drip feed and allowing folks to uncover the relevance and communicate and share with each other. The micro, short bursts of content and activities that allow the learners to kind of weave into the learning experience, get back to work, come back to the learning experience, go back to work. And then the last dimension we really talk about is around social, which is communities interacting and learning together. So when we get to this, when we say the term MOOC, this is what we're talking about. So based on how you've designed them or how you what you've experienced in the past, what we're really laying out here is designing these high-impact experiences that are cohort-driven, spaced out over time, incorporate micro-learning assets, and then has a very robust social feature with it. Now, when we look at this experience, here are the 7 C's of MOOC engagement, which this really comes forward to talk about how you drive that engagement. So I mentioned that one of the myths around this is that there's a high dropout rate, and so you're really talking about the feature of engagement. So how do you design so that you have pull? And basically from day one, activity one, through the completion of the exercise, as they're working through their daily work lives and their personal lives, how do we keep them engaged in small components throughout the experience? And so the 7 C's are really starting in the top left around content, context, competition, completion and certification, collaboration, communication, and curation. And these 7 C's are really brought together, and what I really like about this is that it helps drive success in the corporate experience. And what we're trying to do is to get back to that point of performance, to be able to get to the position where the learners are able to really drive that layer of engagement, so that the learners can not only see the content, but understand how it's relevant for them and really drive it to meaningful application for them as they start to work with it over time. This allows, really by design, times for the learners to actually stop, reflect on it, communicate with each other, share some ideas, get feedback from peers, coaches, subject matter experts, and allow us to allow it to sink in, see how it may apply in work, and kind of come back to that shared experience. So this is really the underlying design principles that we try to incorporate into each of our design components. Now, when we talk about the assets from a micro standpoint, when we look at how are they engaged from a micro, what can actually be incorporated into this learning experience. And so you can have offline instructor-led sessions, virtual instructor-led sessions, discussion forums, polls, missions, on-the-job activities, job aids. I'm not going to read all of these off, but the idea here is that you're able to bring these smaller pieces or assets into the learning experience and talk about how they can move the knowledge forward a little bit, but also allow for feedback and interaction. So between polls is a two-way, how are you thinking on this? How are you reflecting on this? What do you think on this situation? Getting that two-way feedback. The discussion forums, the structured peer review activities, where you're actually creating a work product, putting it out there, and having them, allowing them to kind of come in and review and provide feedback on it. So the idea here is that I refer to it as near synchronous, in the sense that people are still progressing through the experience over time as a group and together, but it does have a definite beginning and end, and they are kind of progressing through stages together. So let's say if you had a 10-week MOOC and you're going to cover 5 topics in 2 weeks, about 2 weeks per topic. What you want to do is within that 2-week window to have the teams kind of progress and consume the content, participate in the activities near each other. They don't always have to be online unless it's intended to be a synchronous session. But this allows them to kind of come in at their leisure when they have time, see that there's been activity, other people have been contributing, and they're able to move the discussion forward, reflect on things, share. So it really is a near synchronous, but it does have a specific beginning and an end. It's not just open-ended, and we'll just kind of keep it open because that changes the nature of the experience. Now, what's important is that just because we've said that the design approach has to be different, we do need to think differently about how we approach it. It really is starting from a learner-centric standpoint versus a content-centric standpoint. Doesn't mean that our historical approaches to design really goes away. We are still saying that you need to bring in the things we've been talking about, whether it's performer or learner-centric design, which means starting at the point of work or application and working back from there to find relevant content, topics, articles, activities that go with that. Or looking at the pervasive learning, which talks about bringing in the formal, the informal, and the social. There are absolutely assets that are brought into this. When you look at the 5 moments in social learning, what allows the time-bound but spaced allows you to kind of almost create a little bit of a cycle for the learners to kind of go through the first time they've learned something, when they add a little bit more to their knowledge base through either reading an additional piece or having a discussion with others, or the opportunity to kind of, now what did you do, try and apply it to something either authentic or near authentic, and you work and get feedback from others. And then as you get feedback, how do you adjust and change and reform your thought about it? And then ultimately, if there's something that popped up or you're struggling with it, how do you actually start to build a network of feedback to how you problem solve around that? By the very nature of the design, it allows us to bring in and almost cover a cycle of that evolution of those learning needs. And it also incorporates a social component, which instead of saying that it's on the teacher or the facilitator or the coach to deliver all the information, what you're doing is using and creating an experience that enables all the participants to come in around the activities, around the content, to moderate, to collaborate, to consume, to share, to curate content. So it opens up the architecture of the design to really bring them in. And all these things are really important. And by the way, it is important to notice that, I love the 5 moments of need, and Conrad Govertson and Bob Mosher for that 5 moments need really get a lot of credit for that, and they do a lot of work around that space with folks. But it does bring this into it. And then I think the last thing is when we look at the neuroscience or the brain-based learning, what we're starting to find with the reinforcement around that is that we're finding that we know that spaced learning works. What I mean is that when the sheep dip approach or the spray and pray approach, sometimes folks refer to it as, where we bring everybody in, drop them in the middle of something, and then just hope they'll hold on to it until the point of future application, just doesn't really bear out in the research. So what we're finding is that the neuroscience and adult learning theory, supported by some of the more recent brain mapping, what we're seeing is that it's reinforced that spaced learning is really critical. Smaller chunks repeated over time, changed with slight moderations or exposures to that content, allowing people to kind of work with and reflect and test on that knowledge or challenge each other with that over time actually leads to a greater retention. I think one of the most powerful things we've seen in our MOOC experiences is that we've actually been able to get to a level 3 evaluation before we've completed the experience and done a level 1 evaluation. And what I mean by this is that by our design, we actually incorporate working with the content, understanding the content, and then incorporating activities that ask them to actually bring authentic application and share that with the group. So using a success case-based approach, we're able to see how they're actually applying it to their authentic environment or potentially transferring it to the workplace and then getting feedback and evolving it. So we're getting evidence of actual transfer and application before we actually ask them, hey, did you really like the experience? So the next one to look at really is when to use a MOOC. So, MOOC's not always really, applicable for everything you go out and do, but I think some really good ones where we've found some powerful uses are when you think about significant business change, and, for example, a new HR process, a merger and acquisition. And, really what happens is the learning can be aligned with the business activity and create a consistent experience. So if, for example, we're going to change our performance review process from 1 time a year to 4 times a year, you can use this strategy that is time-bound and spaced around the 4 times of the year when somebody's going to do it, so that you can actually support and nurture and wrap them around the moments they're going to be applying that to actual in the field. So you can think differently about having a near, during, and a little bit after, and then pick it up, start it again later in the year when maybe the second conversation comes around. So you can actually do that. You can have sustained change, because a lot of change management, which is really, comes in with, like a behavior or mindset change. A lot of change management activities have involved folks coming to grips not only cognitively with what the change is, but emotionally how they feel about it, and then gaining commitment to, embrace that change and then get to that actual execution. And what happens with the timed, the spaced, and the social, it brings in the levers, the leverage from those interactions to really start to get to true traction around change and change practices. New content acquisition, reflection and application, business acumen, new hire programs. You're really trying to bring that into a group of people that leverage other additional resources or themselves. They're trying to apply it in a practitioner community. It really supported through that micro and spaced learning and those application activities. Exchange of ideas with others, new hire experiences, consultative selling, anything that requires the addition of new context or is really built around a heuristic that requires, expert exchange and dialogue and that problem-solving underlying component. So when we're trying to solve a problem, we're thinking about how can we apply new principles and working with others who have tried to solve that problem. You can use a MOOC to do that. And the last one is really motivation or pull-through, and that's where the social really comes through to help with that, the micro, the sustained experience. That's where you get into continuous learning journeys or the support of blended programs. And so it makes it available anytime and anywhere. It gets to that near synchronous time where you have a window that people can kind of move within. It doesn't have to be on this day at this hour. So this is, basically setting up as we're going into our next section where we want to kind of share an example of this. So I'm going to turn this over to Karen. I'm going to quit talking to you guys, and I'll flip over and provide support as we go. But, Karen, I wanted to tee you up, so talk about a little bit about some of the examples we've been working on.
Absolutely. Thank you, Matt. So I'm going to share, this is a quick version of a one-slide version of an example, and then we'll transition into a bigger use case where I'll actually go out and show you what one of these looks like. As we all know, pictures are always worth 1,000 words, so people love to see one in action and what it really looks like. So I will get there as quickly as I can. So this first example, though, I'll spend just a couple minutes talking about this one. This one does fall really into that use case that Matt talked about in a model for supporting change. This was with a pharmaceutical client who had recently adopted a new performance management process. They were going down the path, like many companies are right now, of transitioning away from a very traditional performance management process where you wait till the end of the year, you do a performance review, you assign ratings to everybody, what we're all kind of used to. And we're transitioning into more of a coaching and feedback-centric model. They really wanted that continuous feedback happening throughout the year, and they were moving into a model where they were having quarterly check-ins, and they were really wanting to change the culture to move away from that number hard rating system into this, feedback is a good thing. Let's talk about it. Let's build your development plan. Let's form relationships, and let's give you feedback on an ongoing basis. So it was a really big change for their organization. It's an organization that had a pretty strict culture in the other direction with a lot of metrics and a lot of, important things like salary that were tied to numbers before. So it was a change initiative that was really going to hit people personally. And of course, that means emotions and struggles that go along with that. So this was a project that we actually rolled out to their entire management population all at once. For them, that was 5,000 people. So in this case, the massive word actually does apply. We really were hitting a very large group of people globally. So it wasn't just within the U.S. It was hitting all of their international offices as well, and trying to share information about what this change was going to mean to their organization. So one of the ways that we did that that made this program a little bit unique and also aligned with the spacing idea and aligned with the relevance idea of really keeping this important to what was going on in their environment at that time. So we split this out into 3 phases. And you can kind of see that in the screen capture on the left. And those 3 phases aligned with what was happening in the business throughout the year. So the first phase launched in the February-March timeframe when they announced this new plan. So the first phase was a lot about just what is performance at their organization really now going to be defined as? What are some of those big questions they're going to have? How are we going to start to think about this differently within our organization and started to lay the foundation for setting up a coaching culture and a feedback-rich culture. So that was just, the beginning of accepting change, essentially. Phase 2 happened in the middle of the year after people had already had 1 or 2 of those quarterly conversations and were needing some more tools and resources to help support them through that process. So we focused a lot more in Module 2 or Phase 2 there about what does coaching mean? What are the tools that you're using? What does a conversation sound like? How are you sharing this with your team? So that's really what phase 2 was about. And then phase 3 transitioned into, it's now the end of the year. This is when, the change is really going to hit hard the most, because it is when you're used to doing those annual reviews, and that people had lots of questions about, well, what does my annual review look like now? So we focused phase 3 a lot on, in those moments of need, this was the challenge part of it, of I have to answer these hard questions coming from my people. I have to be able to do something differently. I'm having a lot of tough conversations with my employees. So phase 3 really aligned with that, what was happening in their world at that time. So it was really a great experience. It was really quite successful. There were certainly some bumps along the way and some lessons learned in terms of understanding the importance of change management, understanding the importance of communicating with people. And in this case, the change management wasn't just about the change with their performance process. It was also about the change and how they were learning about that change. So this was a totally new learning approach for them, and we needed to communicate that as well. But it was a very successful program, and really, kind of changed the way that their organization was thinking about learning, and really, got some great feedback from people. And we even had some funny stories with some of the coaches that were participating, as that human interaction that was happening in the environment, sort of became these characters in the company. And when they've come in to do other things, people are like, oh, hey, I know you. I remember you. You helped me learn this. So lots of good little nuggets of information that we are hearing as a result of this program. Matt, anything you want to add to that before I'll shift over to our other program that we want to talk about? Oh, okay. I'm going to take that as a no. So I will go ahead and move on. I want to talk. Oh, no, you're fine.
Say, in the story, if you could just kind of highlight a little bit more around the behavior and mindset change. We had a question just highlighting that. But I think can you probably pick it up in the next example, just kind of be sure to call that out where we were having that commitment to that mindset change or the behavior change in the experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the next example is probably even a better example of that. So I will try to keep that in mind. Okay, so that was one example of a MOOC that really did kind of fall into more of the massive world and aligned with a change initiative, aligned with a management audience, successful in that way. So I want to shift over and talk about a different example. This is one that we refer to as leading self. So this was, to give you the high-level background as to who this was built for from a client and an audience perspective. So we were working with, this is a financial banking institute. It's a fairly large regional bank in the APAC area. So they actually are based out of Singapore, which, as Kayla said at the beginning of the call, happens to be where I'm living right now, and some of these projects, that's part of the reason why. But we worked on a series of opportunities with this bank, but this one in particular was for individual contributors. So they were really embarking on also a bit of a change initiative, but really probably more of a culture change initiative. And as Matt was just referring to, also a bit of a mindset change. So they're really trying to change their learning culture and trying to also change that to be a continuous learning culture, and also a culture in which individuals are owning their own success, taking responsibility for learning for themselves, and trying to move into also more of a digital world. So there was a lot of change happening from a couple of different stakeholders' perspectives, and this played into all of those different pieces that were being talked about. The other thing I think is really interesting with this client is that they were very early in their digital journey. So in terms of digital transformation and all of the different stories that you're reading about these days, as people are moving from traditional learning to e-learning to more of this digital world, kind of the air quotes digital world, they were very early in that journey. They really had very little even traditional e-learning content. They had a little bit of the typical compliance courses that we all love so much. So their experience with digital was pretty much limited to that. They didn't even have a global learning management system in place. They have very few digital tools, like virtual conferencing tools really are not a common practice within the bank. So from a digital perspective, they're kind of in their infancy. So to take on a project like this was a pretty big leap forward in terms of, we're going to take a chance, we're going to try something new, we really want to embrace this digital idea and see how it goes. So I think that they earned a lot of kudos from that perspective of being willing to go on that journey with us and being willing to try something new. I think most of their stakeholders were cautiously optimistic about how it would go, but also pushed back on a lot of things in saying, we don't think our learners will do this. So we had a lot of really good back and forth collaborative conversation about where that would go. And I'll talk about that more as you start to see what the experience actually looks like. But while we had some stakeholders and some sort of champions of the program that were optimistic, there was also a lot of uphill battles that were being fought, where people were seeing, e-learning in their head was a compliance course that was click next for 25 clicks, pass a test and be done. And they really firmly believed that a digital solution was not going to work, that their learners would never adopt it, that people wouldn't show up. I think, a lot of those myths that we talked about at the top of the hour were things that they were pretty firmly believing in. So it was an uphill battle in a lot of ways with that group of stakeholders. And you'll see in the next couple of slides, when I start to share some of the success stories, that we overcame all of those and really turned a lot of naysayers from the beginning into champions as we moved forward. So definitely a success story from that perspective, in addition to the success story for the learners themselves. All right, so let me give you a little bit more perspective on who this course was for and really what the task was at hand. So I think I started to mention this before. This was a course that was done for individual contributors. We were still calling it a leadership course, though. So the bank has a leadership plan that goes from all the way at the top of their executive leadership team and their managers of managers down to their first line managers, but they also felt pretty strongly that leadership doesn't necessarily just mean people managers. Leadership could also mean individual contributors. Everyone in an organization leads something, if it's an individual project, if it's an idea that they want to get across, in order to inspire change within your organization and to really move in a culture change direction. Leadership has to happen from the bottom up. So that was an interesting philosophy, and I think one that we can all respect. So like I said, the business need was tackling a few different directions. They were trying to establish a growth mindset, a culture of learning, a culture of continuous learning, and owning your own learning. And along with that then was owning your own success. So really that willingness to put yourself out there, to go talk to your manager, to offer up new ideas, to champion a change that you want to do. This, remember, is an Asia-based bank, which many Asian companies tend to be very hierarchical based, tend to have a culture of just do what your manager tells you to do. And I think they're trying to shift some of that, and that's where a couple of these first bullet points really came from. At the same time, though, there was also a change initiative happening from the L&D team, from the learning perspective of wanting to shift people into the digital world and really just make people excited about learning. I think one of the biggest success criteria that we heard early on was, even if no learning happens, if people just like it, I would be okay with that, which we know is never really why you want to develop learning, but it really was one of the goals that they wanted to accomplish. Was they wanted to make sure it was an experience that people were willing to recommend to their friends. They wanted this first digital effort and endeavor to be a successful one so that we could continue to build more like it. So it actually was kind of an important goal for us to just make sure that people were enjoying the experience and were willing to come back and try something like that again. From a solution perspective, you can see a couple of those bullet points in the middle that talk a bit about what we did, and that'll come to life as you start to see it in real life in a second here. But very high level, it was a long journey. It was actually a 12-week experience. And I will be the first one to admit that initially when we started developing this, I was like, oh, 12 weeks, that's a long time to keep people engaged. I don't know if we can do that. But that was something that they felt pretty strongly about, and we went for it, and we really did keep people engaged for that long. We did that partially because it is a very blended experience. You know, as Matt said at the top of the hour, digital doesn't necessarily just mean sit down at a computer by yourself and spend an hour there every week doing something. This truly was a blended experience. It involved 2 live events, so 2 actual instructor-led training events. We had a series of about 6 different virtual instructor-led events that were scattered throughout. There was activities that people were asked to do both on the platform and off the platform. Some things were self-directed and independent learning. Other things were to be done with a small group or a team. So really, all the different components that you can think of to try to throw into a learning experience, we put a lot of them into this bag. And then I think one of the behavior change comments that was mentioned earlier, as well as like the habit building and the spacing and all of those neuroscience approaches that Matt talked about, we really tried to keep those in mind with this too, and that the events and the activities that we were asking them to do early in the experience, we intentionally kept very simple and tried to get them used to this type of learning and what you were asking them to do. And then as the experience progressed, we were able to ask them to do more, to think about things a little bit differently, to get into it a little bit deeper than maybe what we could have asked them to do in week 1. So that's part of the way we started to get into some of the behavior change and habit building stuff, was to keep repeating ideas, building habits, and slowly kind of building up their confidence level as we went through the experience. So you can kind of read the rest of those bullet points. I'll bring those out as we go. But I want to call attention to the 3rd column, which is all about results. And I can honestly say, in 20 plus years of working in the learning field, this particular course is probably one of my proudest moments from a results perspective. I went into this obviously with high expectations and a lot of hopefulness in saying, yes, we believe in this type of experience. We've seen it work at other clients. Really we can make this happen. And I think the results even blew me away. It really is. It's some of the best stories that I've ever seen in a learning course actually came out of this one. So you can see there's some numbers. Everybody always kind of likes the hard numbers, and you can see almost everything there is a 90 percentile kind of thing. But to me, what was more impactful were the actual stories from learners. And that speaks to what Matt alluded to earlier of starting to get to level 3 evaluations before you even necessarily ask somebody to take a test. A lot of what this course was about was culture change and people thinking differently and people doing things differently and taking little nuggets of things that they learned in this course and behaving differently because of it. And we gave them the opportunity to share those stories. They were able to share those stories both on the platform. They could do that either in a written way or even in a video way. So people were even recording little selfie videos of themselves telling those stories and posting them. And then we also had an opportunity at the end of the experience where we actually got back together physically in a capstone event, and we were able to kind of share some of those stories live to each other as well. And the stories that we heard literally ranged from people recognizing that they wanted to try a different type of career. They weren't sure that they had the confidence to do it. And suddenly this course said, yeah, you know what? I really do want to do this. I think I can do it. I have the confidence now to go speak to my manager. And over the 3 months of this course, they actually changed jobs purely because they had signed up for and taken this course. We had examples of people who had extremely challenging relationships with other people across different business units. They took some of the tips from the communication section, actually implemented it, and they now go to coffee once a week with people who used to be, an arch enemy on the other side of the company. So we had these real life experiences that really just kind of, made your heart melt a little bit. We had somebody else who had just come back from a medical leave and was talking about how they really were not feeling very engaged, weren't really quite sure how to get back into the swing of things. And this course kind of helped him find his groove again. And he was really feeling motivated and energized again, really a lot because of the confidence that the course gave him. So a lot of really, really great stories that came out of how people were using this in a real way, and it was really impacting and changing their behavior of how they were contributing to the organization. All right.
So Karen,
Sometimes I get a little long-winded, so I'll try to keep moving.
No, you're good. And before we head in, I wanted to be able to address a couple of questions that came up through the chat windows, and
Sure.
I thought it'd be good to kind of introduce them here. So the first one is that Sandra was, talking about, 12 weeks is a long for a training or learning event, and I wanted to call out that that's not an unusual conversation, but when you think about the actual learning seat time or the experience time, it could equal a 3 or 4 day experience. So instead of 24 to 36 hours in 3 or 4 days, you're actually pushing it into smaller incremental pieces sustained over time. And once folks get past that, the efficiency model of saying, we're just going to take everybody and put everything we can and show you everything in one moment, then we start to really show how do people really think, learn, transfer, and apply. That's where you get a lot of uptake on this. So the platform really enables it to be able to achieve it and make it sustainable, but design is really what brings it home. So I wanted to kind of call out that one component, and it'll be reinforced as you talk about how we design and develop these in the sections that Carol's going to come up with. The other one was, how does a cell work when you're saying, hey, I have an LMS, but I have Intrepid. Are they the same thing? Are they different? How do they overlap? How do we bring that in? And that's actually a common question that we're seeing, but it's a little more of a complex. And in many ways, an LMS is only really designed to track and report on information about completion. I mean, it's really what most LMSs are really designed to do. Now, they've expanded. Traditional LMSs are starting to create some social add-ons, but they're not really integrated. When you think about this example, this would have been really hard to recreate in the nature of the platform. The ease to come in, the ability to create space for relevance, the opportunity to share and grow with folks over time would have been a much more challenging interface within an LMS. It's not that you can't create features of this in the current tool sets, is that you need to pick the right tool that's going to drive and facilitate that conversation. So it is one of which allows you to kind of use it selectively, a tool. It's not a tool to replace the LMS. It's one to have a very specific application that will give you a return on that investment that then the results are tracked in the LMS ultimately. So I just wanted to address those are two questions that popped in the chat window. So I know we're getting short on time. Carrie, you want to go ahead and push forward on?
Absolutely, and I'll try to bounce through these next few slides a little bit quicker so I can jump over and show you the platform here too. So real quick, from a design perspective, in the process that we follow, we do really try to embrace the learner-centric ideology that's out there. We really put the learner at the center of everything. Everything we do starts with defining learner personas and saying, who is the learner, what are they going to care about, what are their pain points, what are their needs, how are we going to address those? With that idea in mind, we really have adopted a lot of things that align with design thinking. I think if you're deeply into design thinking, we may not follow it exactly, but embrace the concepts of it most definitely. So it's also inherently an agile process. As you're designing, things change. And that's actually another one of the advantages to having a 12-week experience is that often, and this was certainly no exception, often when we start to design these experiences, when we launch week 1, week 4 or week 6 may not be done yet. So the platform and the way that these processes work allow us to do that. So when we're learning and seeing the way that learners are interacting with the first couple of weeks of the experience, we're able to tweak and continue to refine what's happening in the later experiences. And this course, I think, was a great example of that. I mentioned that we had some stakeholders that were not real keen on some of these ideas and really weren't sure that their learners were going to embrace it. So one perfect example of how this, building, testing, agile as we go example is that they really didn't think that learners were going to contribute much in discussion threads. They just weren't sure that culturally, both from an Asian perspective as well as from a company perspective, that people were going to put themselves out there, be willing to share their stories, and really kind of, ask meaningful questions either in discussion threads, but especially in things like videos. They were 100% sure that there's no way anybody would ever post a video. So we didn't put any of that in the first couple of weeks. The first few weeks were pretty straightforward. We had like one or two, smaller opportunities to do that were super simple, low risk kinds of options. We weren't asking them to share their souls. We were asking them to contribute in short one-word answer kinds of things. And what we saw was they embraced it wholeheartedly, and we got huge participation rates. And as we started to see that over the first couple of weeks, they were more willing to try things later. So we came back and said, hey, we have an idea to ask them to submit these selfie videos. Are you on board? And the answer we got back was, if you would have asked me that 3 weeks ago, I would have said no, but I've seen what's happening, so yes, let's try it. So it's one of the advantages to kind of living in that agile world and being willing to listen to the learners, see what's happening, and adapt as you go. So within that design process, like we said, we do start with the learners. We typically go down a pretty traditional process of developing personas and understanding who those learners are so that we can keep coming back to them and making sure that we're addressing their needs as we're fleshing out the design. We also try to define some success criteria up front. So we do this so that we have something to help us make decisions, help us prioritize content, but also to help us figure out how we're going to measure success later. So this kind of helps us to develop what our evaluation metrics are going to be, the types of reports we want to pull, the kinds of questions that we want to ask. But this also is a great level set for all of our stakeholders to be able to understand why we're doing what we're doing and why we're making some of the decisions and prioritization options that we're doing. So this was just one example of how this shook out in this particular experience. And then typically all of these things come to life early on in what we refer to as a hackathon. So our hackathons are anywhere from a half day to 2 or 3 days where we're able to come together in some hands-on design experiences. So this is a process that we really believe is important in that it's a collaborative design process. It's not us coming up with an idea and just sending it to a client and saying, what do you think? It's more of us working with the client to come up with the design ideas together. And to do that in a way where all of the stakeholders are in the room and we can make decisions quickly and we can come to a consensus and be able to throw it into a prototype, see what it looks like, change it if we want to, and move on beyond that quickly. So here's just a few examples of pictures of what was really happening when we were designing this particular experience. And then
So Kara, I had a real quick question here from Jim. He was asking for 5,000 individual contributors, how many 12-week sessions, how many cohorts were arranged for this? And I think it was just in general a logistics type question of, as people try and get their minds wrapped around, for scale, because this really is meant for, it can be definitely for intimate groups, but it has a sustainability for scale. So
absolutely, yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. So this particular experience, we initially set off to do it in cohorts of 300. We actually ended up scaling that back a bit for the pilot to being more like 100. I think it ended up being about 110 for the first cohort that we went through it with. We made it all the way through that full cohort before we started another one so that we could learn some of those lessons, make some tweaks, be able to incorporate some of that feedback. After we finished the first cohort, we waited a month or two and then launched a second cohort. The second cohort was 300. And actually that is the cohort that we're running right now. So we're almost at the end of our second cohort right now. Our last week is actually happening right now, and our closing event is going to be happening in about another week and a half. Long-term plans, though, is that they ideally are planning to run this continuing in that 300-person cohort perspective and trying to run somewhere between 2 and 6 per year, kind of depending on how they're going to tackle their regional rollouts in some of the other countries in the area. So, and that obviously changes from client to client quite a bit. That's one of the advantages to a platform like this and a solution like this is that it is quite scalable. You can do the same type of approach for a 30-person cohort all the way on up to, the first example that I talked about with 5,000 people. So it can scale really pretty quickly.
I think one of the important things, and this was Christopher was asking, a question about, how do you set the scope or the approach for the learners to take ownership of the journey? And I think this is a fundamental design principle that really is a shift for instructional designers themselves as they build these. And real quickly, and Kara, jump in as I'm doing this, but the idea is that we're not trying to create an end-to-end packed experience. Like if you were to create a standard WBT, a web-based training module, you would have, either slides or topics, and it would be a complete narration from beginning to end of the message, even taking them through the Q&A session with it. What we're trying to do here in this experience is create almost design with some intentionality around negative space, which means that we give them some content, but we invite the learners into the experience, expecting them to take ownership for it, and that's where they actually bring the relevance to the table. The relationship has to be that in a learner-centric journey like this, the learner has to take accountability. But the designers have to create space that enables the learners to step into that and take ownership. And what we've seen is that when we design it really well, and this is where you get into things like rate and flow as new dimensions of a design, not just sequencing and chunking, but when you start to think about rate, flow, pulse, these are new dimensions in our designs. When you create that space, they start to see how it may apply to them, they really embrace it, and that's where the power of the design plays out. It's not in the hardcore platform. It's not simply in the fact that we've designed really great content. It's the combination of all those elements coming together to really help them embrace that. And once they take that, they want to own this. They want to be a part of this. They want to have those conversations. So I don't care if you want to elaborate on that.
Yeah, no, I think that was a great answer. I do think it is definitely a personal ownership, and everybody kind of finds their way into that. We've seen, everybody uses this platform a little bit differently. Some people, like the approach of I'm going to log in for 10 minutes every day and I'm going to explore what I want to then. Other people are like way too busy during the week. I'm just going to do it for an hour on Saturday on my own time. Okay, great. Whatever works best for you works for you. So I think that's kind of what we have seen happen. The other piece I would maybe add to that is the change management and communication plan, which Matt probably gets tired of hearing me say because it's something I harp on a lot with all of our clients, is this is not just a change management process for the stakeholders, it's a change management process for the designers, it's a change management process for the learners. It's a different way of learning, it's a different way of thinking about things. And if you don't manage that communication and tell them some of those answers and tell them what to expect and tell them, when things are going to happen, it is really hard to get them to make that commitment. So I think there's a variety of ways that you can go about doing that, but you just need to think about how you're going to do that and put that plan in place. So all right, let me, in the next few minutes here, try to give you a flyby tour of what this platform looks like. So first of all, this is what I'm showing you today was built in Intrepid. So it is not our platform. It is a partnership that we have with another vendor that's Intrepid by VitalSource. I personally do love this platform. I think there's a lot of great features about it, but the concepts that we talked about today and how you can build out a MOOC is not necessarily only limited to this platform. There are plenty of other platforms out there in that space, competitors to Intrepid as well, that could do similar types of things. This just happens to be a partnership that has worked very well for us and a platform that I've seen a lot of success with. So that said, this is the homepage of the experience that I was just telling you about. The platform is very configurable, so homepages can look drastically different and can be set up with more panels than what are here, less panels than what you see here. This just happens to be the configuration we went with. As you can see, we also kind of went with this hiking or trekking theme. So you're going to see a lot of the graphics and a lot of the things that show up in here kind of talking about that journey from a hiking perspective. So again, from a visual perspective, very configurable, very customizable. So I'm going to go ahead and just jump into one of the sections here. I'm going to say probably the place to start is the one that says start here. So I'll go ahead and show you what that looks like. So as that is loading, I'll tell you, so that this, keep in mind that this event did actually start with a live event. So a lot of what you see in the start here was not necessarily available to them when they first got started. One of the things that's nice about this platform is that you can time release pieces of it. So you probably noticed on the home page that Module 2 and Module 3 just said coming soon. So that 12-week experience, we slowly released the content out 1 week at a time. So every Monday they were getting a communication that says the next week of content is now available. Here's what you should be going in and doing. So each week of that experience went out a little bit at a time. But all of that started with a live event. And we introduced the platform at that live event and tried to kind of get them introduced to how to interact with it, the types of things you were going to do while we were all physically together. That said, though, all of the pages within this, so any of those panels that I would have clicked on, are going to look fairly similar to this. It is a very tile-based, so what we kind of refer to these blocks as tiles. It's a very tile-based platform, and what's nice about that is, one, it sort of forces you into the micro-learning concept. Each one of the blocks on the page is a micro-learning chunk. That little block could be anything. It could be a video, it could be a little block of text, it could be an audio thing, it could be something that links out to your intranet to content that's hosted someplace else. You've got a lot of possibilities for what those little blocks are, but each one of those blocks sort of lives by itself. And you can see that we're not forcing navigation, as Matt was saying. There's no next button anywhere on this page. As a learner, I can choose to just scan through it and choose what looks interesting to me. And if I wanted to jump all the way to the last tile at the bottom of the page, I can do that. So it does give the learner that choice and that freedom to move around. But again, that kind of makes you as a designer think a little bit differently about what you're putting in those blocks as well. So let me show you just real quickly what some of these look like. So most of the experiences that we design, somewhere towards the beginning, it may not be the very first tile like it is here, but somewhere towards the beginning, we like to have somebody from the company give you a welcome message. I know you guys can't hear this, so I'm going to stop it because I can hear it. But usually early on in the experience, we shoot a video of some sort. It can be very informal or slightly more formal, where people are able to share, what is this experience about? Why are you there? Why is this important? Why have we invested in this particular initiative for you? There's opportunities here for things like polls. So early on in this one, we were asking them, what kind of learning have you done before? Remember I said one of the initiatives here was to think about learning differently. So we were really trying to get at, what have you done? Maybe I watched a video last on YouTube is a learning experience for me. And it does give real-time results as to how other people in the experience have answered that same question. Let me jump ahead. I know I'm super short on time, so let me just show a couple of my favorite features. One of the things that you heard us talking about in terms of adding the relevance is where you make the space for the learner to put their own contributions in here. That's what tiles like this are for. So this is an example of what we refer to as a mission. Oops, let me go back to the beginning of this one. And this is really where we ask the participants to stop, think about something, maybe go try it and practice it offline, and then come back and share your thoughts, share your experiences, or give your answer to what something is. So this is where they take the content and make it their own. They start to see the relevance and make the connection, but they're also sharing it with the rest of the cohort and can learn from what the other people in the cohort have done as well. So in this case, this was a mission that we gave them to do actually during class, where we had done some mind mapping activities in class, and we were asking them as a group to take a picture of the mind map that they had created and upload it to the platform to share with the other people that were there. So this is just a really simple example. Obviously, these missions can be adapted to anything you want. They can be introduce yourself activities. They can be, planning an event for your team. They can be, really the limit is your own creativity for how you want to use these mission types of events. This is another quick, easy one here. Discussion threads are obviously another important way that you can help make that social connection. Here was an example of in the kickoff event, we were doing a Q&A session with some leaders from the organization, and we were actually helping to collect questions from the group via a discussion thread. So you'll see other examples of discussion threads throughout this whole experience where we target the questions in about the content or give them opportunities to ask questions of the experts and the coaches that are involved in the experience. This is a pretty typical way of doing a discussion thread like what you would see in a Reddit or other discussion types of tools. So these missions and discussions are just one way that you start to make those human connections within a digital experience, which is one of those core pieces of the definition of a MOOC that we talked about earlier. Is digital does not mean not human. I think that's one of the failures, I think, of e-learning early on, was that it did start to take away some of the human components. And when you start to use platforms like this where you can stay connected to your peers, stay connected to coaches, stay connected to moderators, it really kind of keeps that experience more relevant to you and more exciting. So I know we are at the top of the hour. I could certainly keep going on for a very long time in this platform. Let me just show you one real quick feature though. Gamification is obviously another buzzword in the industry these days, and of course this platform includes that as well. Every single thing that you click on and do throughout the platform earns you points. Things of more relevance, harder to contribute, typically have a higher point value. Things that are easier to do typically have a lower point value. But points and then badges are another way that, sets of activities grouped together. Once you've completed them, you earn a badge. So the concept of completion, and that whole idea of checking a box becomes very different within these types of experiences. And that's one of the early conversations that you need to have with folks is, what does completion mean? And the idea of badges and earning points might be part of that. But this is also a lot about learner motivation, competition, encouraging people to come back in, that pull-through experience. It's amazing how much being at the top of a leaderboard can encourage people to come back and do something. So that's a little bit rushed, but I know we're at the top of the hour, so I do want to stop and give Kayla an opportunity to say the final wrap-up options.
Yeah, I know. Sorry. Thank you for those of you who stayed on. I know we're about a minute over. So we're actually going to pause and not do the official Q&A at the end. The engagement during the session with all of the great questions that came in has been fabulous, and there's a lot more that we could discuss. So Matt and Kara, I'm going to take the dozens of questions that came in and send them to you. We'll create a blog post, put them on our website, and email them to everyone on the call. So we'll make sure to cover all of the great questions that came in. Kara, if you don't mind flipping back to the slide so everyone can see your contact information. I do encourage everyone to continue the conversation with Kara and Matt beyond today's session. So you can see their contact information here in the slide deck. We'll also be sending everybody a link to the recording from today, as well as a PDF of the slides to the email address that you provided when you registered. So thank you again to today's speakers, and thank you to everyone who attended for your time and attention. We do hope that you'll join us again for our future webinars. In February, we have two great topics we'll be talking about. One is on leadership essentials, and the second one towards the end of the month is on Learning Practitioner's Guide to Innovation. I wish everyone a wonderful and productive rest of your day, and thank you so much again for joining us.